Change is inevitable, but what is it about change that makes it so difficult for us to deal with? I'm Owen Fitzpatrick, and in this episode of Changing Minds, I'm going to walk you through not only why change occurs, not only how it impacts us or affects us from a neurological and psychological perspective, but I'm also going to walk you through time-tested, evidence-based strategies for how you can handle change, how you can deal with whatever changes you are experiencing in your personal or professional life. Let's get ready to go. So when we talk about change, what are the kinds of things that we need to learn to be able to do to be as effective as possible? One of the things that I'm reminded of is this wonderful quote that I found from Alan Watts when he said, "The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance." And I love the way in which he described that because it really talks about understanding that change is inevitable. No matter what we do, we don't have any choice. Change is happening to us. And in order for us to be able to function, survive, and not just survive, but thrive through change, we need to not just allow it to happen to us, but understand how we can make it happen for us. And that means reckoning with the changes that are taking place in our life. And these could be the big changes, right? We all go through big changes in life. Whenever you get a new job, big change. Whenever you move to a new place, big change. If you get married, big change. If you have babies and kids, big change. There's a lot of changes that occur, a lot of changes that happen. And in order for us to be able to be at our best, we need to be able to roll with it. You need to roll with it. You need to take your time. You need to say what you say. Don't let anyone get in your way because it's all too much for me to take. I've totally butchered the lyrics and the music of that Oasis song. And I just want to apologize to Liam and Noel. Not that they'll ever see this, but if you ever do come across it, I'm sorry. I won't do that ever again, I promise. But you do have to roll with it. You do have to take your time. I find myself drawn into saying that again, but I'm going to stop. And the reason is because what we need in order for us to be able to thrive through the changes that take place is we need to understand fundamentally that before anything, we need to have the right philosophy of what it means to change. Because life is an endless stream of changes. And change is necessarily just part of the process. It's part of living. So to me, the way I look at changing from an organizational perspective, whenever I'm asked to consult on change management projects and big change management projects that are happening over a number of different months and sometimes even years, what I like to break things down to is 5 different steps in terms of change, or 5 different areas in terms of change. The first step is handling change. And this is really about what do you do to make sure that you don't go insane when you're facing all of this uncertainty and chaos and change. And a large part of that is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about how do you deal with it in your mind? How do you chase down or shout down the gremlins of change? How do you take control over what's going on in terms of the internal narrative or story you're telling yourself about the changes that are taking place? That's the first piece of handling change. Once you identify how you can handle change more effectively, the next stage is navigating change better. And this really means learning what you need to do specifically, orienting yourself towards what's next, what's going on, what do you need to do about it, what's the direction you want to go in. That's navigating change successfully. Then part 3 is really about creating change. What are the ways in which you can create the kind of changes in your life, in terms of your habits, in terms of what you do, in terms of what you think? And how can you start to build new habits that enable you to be more comfortable in the new world? How can you create a new business as usual that becomes second nature to you? How can you condition yourself in this effective way? Number 4 is in leadership positions, you want to drive change. And this means ensuring that you're motivating and inspiring the people around you. You're motivating them and getting them very clear over what changes need to take place. And you're helping them to start to feel more motivated themselves. In effect, you're kind of helping them to handle the change. You're helping them to create the change. You're helping them to navigate the change. And then finally, leading the change. And leading change is really about inspiring and getting the very best out of the folks that you work with, helping them to be able to feel not just they can do it, not just motivated to do it, but inspired to relish it, to look forward to it, to embrace it, to, as Alan Watts says, to join the dance. Now, in the future, in other episodes, we'll talk more about some of these other stages, some of these other areas, because when we talk about changing minds, a big part of it is all of these different steps. But I want to talk about handling the change right now. And handling the change is something that really happens individually. It happens inside of us. It's something that we need to be able to do. Ultimately, what I want you to be able to build by the end of this episode is I want you to build what I call change confidence. This means that you have the requisite confidence to be able to know that come what may, no matter what kinds of changes take place in your environment, no matter what kinds of news that you get about your future, you can take it, you can embrace it, and you can roll with it. And having this change confidence really comes down to understanding why in the first place we struggle with change. And that's what we're going to walk through. We'll talk about why do we struggle with change? What do a lot of people get wrong when they think about change? What is going on when we're making changes? And most importantly, what are the strategies that you can use starting today that will help you to be more change confident? What will help you to be able to handle the changes that are occurring in a really, really effective and powerful manner? That's what we're going to look at. And let's start by thinking through, well, why is it that change is so damn difficult to deal with? Why does change make it so uncomfortable for us? And while there's lots of different reasons, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of this, fear of that, there's also pretty much two different buckets that I like to put the reasons why change is difficult in. The first is based upon the way in which our brain works. Our brains typically like to work based upon what I call the principle of efficiency. And this is very simply that our brain tends to conserve energy. Your brain uses around about 20% of the calories that you consume is used by the brain, right? Whereas it's only representing around 3 to 4% of your body mass. So overall, your brain tends to over-index how much it uses the calories that you consume. Your brain uses a lot of energy. Now, I know what you're thinking. Owen, there's people I know, and I promise you, their brains use very little energy whatsoever. In fact, I'd be surprised if their brain ever used a calorie because their decisions or choices are so poor. And I get it. I understand. But we're in a safe space now because anyone who is in a situation where they don't use their brains very often, well, they're obviously not listening to the Changing Minds podcast. Are they? Well, if so, you're very welcome. Don't worry your brain about it. But for the rest of you, very intelligent, obviously, listeners to this podcast and viewers of this podcast, let me say that our brain likes this principle of efficiency because it makes it easy for it to function. And what happens is your brain creates shortcuts. Now, Daniel Kahneman, in his wonderful book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he talks about the shortcuts of System 1 and System 2. And he says that System 1 is when your brain tries to create lots of automatic patterns. It's how your brain thinks fast. It creates easy conclusions. So when I say 2 multiplied by 2, you immediately say 4 because your brain has that as an automatic pattern. System 2 is when your brain has to think slower. It's when critical reasoning kicks in. It's when you've got to evaluate what's going on. And that requires a lot more energy. The amount of energy that you use will be a lot more in System 2 than it will be in System 1. Therefore, your brain tends to use System 1 most of the time. 90% of the time you think, you're using System 1. You're trying to make things as easy as possible. So when change comes about, your brain's not very happy with the change. Your brain's thinking to itself, oh, really? And it's not just because you're lazy, it's because your brain is trying to conserve the calories. And when it sees a change, it has to go, oh, now I got to figure out what to do here. So your brain is forced into working really, really hard to try to figure out, okay, how do I deal with this? Not a good place to be, not a good plan. So the first reason why the brain struggles with change is because it likes to be in System 1, and whenever change happens, it has to be in System 2. It doesn't like to use that energy. The second reason why change is difficult for the brain is because not that we fear change, but we fear uncertainty. And as soon as change occurs, that puts us into a whole world of uncertainty. Your brain is a prediction machine. Its job is to figure out what's going to happen next so it can keep you alive. And so when the brain is in a situation of uncertainty, that means it can't predict with certainty what's going to happen next. And your brain obviously doesn't like that because that means that you're going to be in danger. Again, back in the hunter-gatherer days, in order for us to be able to make decisions and survive, we needed to make predictions. You get your predictions wrong or you don't know what predictions to make, all of a sudden your life is in danger. Nowadays, not so much. Nowadays, it's not that every time we get stressed, our lives are in danger. But back then, you make the wrong decision, you mess with the wrong cave person. Not a good idea, not a good plan. Did you not see the stick that they were going to hit you with? Much bigger than your stick. But you weren't focusing on that. because you were in a situation whereby you were trying to predict what they were going to do, and it was uncertain to you because you hadn't met them before. And parts of your brain lit up to make it so that you were aware, I'm in a dangerous situation here. I need to figure out what's going on. This same, what we call negativity bias, is used by the news and is used by the media to keep our attention. Because whenever they put on a story, they will scare you in the story. They will tell you how terrible things are, because that immediately gets your attention, because our brains are oriented towards figuring out what could go wrong whenever we're in a state of uncertainty. So your brain tries to figure out what's going wrong when we feel uncertain. Therefore, we are stressed. Now, what do we do with regards to the media in order to deal with the stress? We got to keep reading the newspaper. We got to keep watching the news so that we can figure out any information that might be useful. Now, most of the time, it's not information that's useful. It's the same old crap over and over again. But the key here is that when you are dealing with change, as soon as a change happens, you're now in a state of uncertainty. And when you're in a state of uncertainty, now all of a sudden you've got to figure things out, and it's a scary place to be. So the first reason we don't like change is because it's effortful and we hate the amount of energy it requires. The second reason we don't like change is because it's scary, because of the uncertainty. So now let's look, if we can, at what are the most important things that we need to be able to reckon with in order for us to be as effective as we can be at handling change. And the first thing we have to understand is that handling change is something that inevitably occurs in almost every area of our life. And this could be small little changes that take place in your life, or it could be big changes. Obviously, we went through COVID. Right? COVID made a huge impact upon almost everyone on the planet's lives. When we went through COVID, we had to figure out, how do we live in this new world? How do we live in a world where, for a time, it was inadvisable to leave our homes? How do we live in a world where we constantly have to protect ourselves from this virus that's invisibly crawling around the world? How do we protect ourselves in such a situation? Politically, things have been crazy over the last few years. All sorts of different types of attitudes and perspectives, polarization like you wouldn't believe, where the two sides, at least certainly in America, the two sides tend to be moving further and further away from each other, and there's a huge breakdown in trust. That makes things more uncertain and creates more change, creates more chaos. You have what Nassim Nicholas Taleb calls the black swan, which is an event that is unpredictable, but makes a real impact upon the world. Or even white swan events, as he calls them, which are things that we can't predict. We just don't know when they're going to occur. But again, we have an uncertainty. And when they occur, they have a big impact. So once again, change comes about as a result of the white swans and the black swans. And so you have all of these different things. You've got now AI disrupting. We're taken over by the robots. I don't know if you use ChatGPT. It's incredible, some of the things that it can do. And again, it's the fear. Will this take my job? Will this overtake me? Will we be outperformed by robots? It's a scary thought to think a robot could have more personality than you, right? We don't want to be in a world whereby we're second place to robots. We've all watched the Terminator movies. We know how that ends. Sarah Connor. It's scary. It's terrifying. None of us want that. None of us want to have to be forced to become John Connor and save the universe by sending a Terminator back in time to kill another Terminator. I don't know. I didn't see any of the sequels either, so I'm not going to keep elaborating on that point. But what I do want to elaborate on is the notion that in order for us to be able to handle change, we need to recognize COVID, AI, the black swan events, the white swan events. We live in what we call a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Everything is connected. Globalization means that when one thing happens, when a supply chain is disrupted in Asia, it affects business in the States. Wherever you go, change has a big impact. There is no way we can survive if we don't have the requisite mindset and ability to navigate our way through the changes that take place on an ongoing basis. So let's look at some of the things that we need to recognize if we are to be able to deal with change. What is it that we need to understand about change? Well, first of all, we have to understand that there's good changes and bad changes. There's expected changes and there's changes that we don't expect. And we need to be able to understand the difference between them. We need to be able to fundamentally be okay with whatever kinds of changes occur. And that means having a different philosophy about what it means. When you recognize, first of all, that change is inevitable, and we understand that we have to learn to dance with it, learn to embrace it. What that allows us to do is no longer fight against the change and resist the change. Because resisting the change isn't just a problem for the environment or a problem for the culture. Resisting the change is exactly what happens when we're stressing ourselves about it, when we're struggling inside, when we're struggling internally. And the best way to look at it, and then I want to start to look a little bit about what people get wrong about change, but the best way I've found to look at it is a little bit like every single story, the hero's journey, for example. Whenever you take a protagonist in any story, and whenever something happens to them, what happens to them is a challenge for them and puts them in a bad situation, not because it's always bad. So, for example, a lot of times in stereotypical stories, we think, here's a protagonist and they face a monster. And that's the typical strategy. Everything was okay for Luke Skywalker until the stormtroopers, spoiler alert, killed his aunt and his uncle, right? And then all of a sudden it was chaotic. And before that, he obviously met R2-D2 and C-3PO, and they led him to, I'm really ruining this movie for you. I hope you haven't seen it. I hope you have seen A New Hope. And it's kind of your fault if you haven't watched it yet. So I'm going to stop now. I'm not going to give you much more of the information about what happens. But let me just say, Star Wars is wonderful. A New Hope. Watch it. It's brilliant. But in that story, if you take it, what happens is it's not just that something bad happens. It's that something throws your life out of balance. As a protagonist in the story, when your life is thrown out of balance, you try to correct it. There's a great movie called Brewster's Millions, an old school movie, I think I call it old school, from the 80s. What happens is this guy gets all of this money left to him in the will of his great uncle. And there's a deal, he has to spend a certain amount of it. And if he spends a certain amount of it, he'll get 10 times the amount of money. But he's 30 days to spend it, or 60 days or something. It's a great movie, but what it is someone experiencing something amazingly good, because he's down and out before he gets this. So the event that happens to the protagonist, the reason that they struggle with it isn't because it's a bad event. It's because it throws their life out of balance. This is good balance or bad balance, but it means that their life has now changed. And at the heart of every story is change. Every single story that's ever existed is about change. And so when you think about it like that, you realize that the story of your life is the story of a protagonist that experiences lots of mini stories, lots of experiences of change. When you see it like that, to me, it really transforms the way in which you experience the changes you take place, because you recognize it's part of your larger story, and that every single change is the opportunity to help you or to hurt you. And so when we reckon with it in that way, it changes the very dynamics, the way in which we experience the change and the way in which we think about it from there on in. We have some myths, some misconceptions about change, things we think about change, like, for example, change always needs to be stressful. But even the research around stress itself, some of the research done by Professor Elia Crum, Kelly McGonigal in her great book, The Upside of Stress, talks about this research, about how your beliefs about the stress you're experiencing will actually play a large part in determining how much that stress actually impacts you. So in other words, if you believe that the stressful event, or in this case, the change that's occurring, if you believe that it's going to be good for you, then it's certainly a lot less bad for you in the real world. So biologically, we're less negatively impacted by stress if we believe that the stress itself is going to help us. And the same is true of change. The belief you have about change, and that's why I spent a bit of time talking about the philosophy, seeing it as part of your story, is that the belief that you have about change plays a large part in determining how you're going to actually react to that change and how to deal with that change effectively. It's also important to understand that change doesn't just happen to you, it can also happen for you. And what I mean by that is, it really comes down to how you perceive the change. If you see this change as an opportunity to be able to improve, to get better, then you see every single change you go through as something that helps you to grow, something that helps you to thrive, something that helps you to move forward. Change can sometimes make people feel powerless because, again, they're the victims of change. But once again, if you're the protagonist in your own story, you no longer are the victim of the change. You're the hero of the change, which means you experience the same thing the victim does, but you focus on what you can control. You focus on your attitude. And you learn how you can deal with it in the most effective way. And so when you do this, you can turn a corner. And the beauty of this is that you don't have to know everything about the change. A lot of times people think, well, the problem here is I don't know what changes are going to take place. But in many ways, we never know. Human beings are so much worse at predicting than they think they are. Even people who work in the weather, they do a decent job a lot of the time, but a lot of the time they just don't know. we get things wrong, the predictions we make wrong so much. And even people that profess to have all the answers never do. And what that tells us is the unpredictability of life. And because life is so unpredictable, it means in order for us to survive in life, we have to accept that fundamental fact. And so with all that in mind, we then have to ask ourselves the final question, which is, so what can we do? If it's true that we're protagonists in the story of life, and in this story of life we'll experience lots of change, and we don't know how to deal with change, it begs the question, how can we become more change confident? How can we be better at handling change? And it's simple. I say it's simple. It's not really simple. There's a few things you need to do. But the first part of it is we need to become aware of what's going on. And that means understanding what is happening, understanding what is going on, what are the changes that are taking place, and what don't we know. So there's always going to be two buckets. It's the changes you know that are happening and the changes that you don't know that are happening, but you know there's some sort of change. And what you then have to be able to do is you have to be able to be comfortable and confident with whatever goes on. So you plan for whatever you know is going to happen. So you understand, look, this is going to happen, so this is what we need to do. But when you don't know what's going to happen, you bring it down and you go, what are we fully in control over? What do we know that we can deal with? What do we know that we can do? What do we have full certainty about? And when you focus on what you have full certainty about, and you focus on what you can do and what you can control, it means that when the craziness occurs or the rug is pulled out underneath you, you no longer fall into the trap of going, oh no, what am I going to do? Because you're focusing on the things that you know will help you. So for instance, you're in a role, in a job. You know that, for example, you're going to keep your job, but you don't know if it's going to be the same job. You don't know if you're going to be sent off to a different division. So what you might do is you might focus on what are all the things that no matter what happens, wherever you work in the same organization, you know you've control over. And it could be what skills you have. It could be your resume. It could be the relationships that you have, the mentors that you have. It could be what you do with your time when you're not working. It could be the areas of your life that you're fully in control over. When during COVID, when craziness was happening, we didn't know what was going to happen and we didn't know the news. And it was like, how many people are going to die tomorrow? What's going to happen tomorrow? Are we doing better? What are the numbers like? And then the vaccine started to be done. How are they getting on with the vaccines? All that sort of jazz. And we were constantly in this perpetual state of uncertainty. What did people do? Well, after they panicked and tried to buy every piece of toilet paper, like literally toilet paper became the most precious commodity, which was fascinating. It was like more popular than water, right? And if you don't drink water, then it's going to be harder to go to the toilet. So I don't know why that happened. But after the toilet roll saga of everyone like fighting, you see those videos online where people were like fighting over toilet roll? I mean, imagine looking at it now and seeing a video of yourself fighting with someone over toilet roll. That has to be embarrassing. Like, as embarrassing things go, that's pretty embarrassing. But after we did the toilet roll saga, what did people do? They did things like bake banana bread. They baked banana bread. And then they started to learn to bake normal bread. Why do we bake things? Why do we make things? Why do we get comfort out of do? It's because we could control it. It's because we had a recipe and we just did it step by step, one thing at a time. And as a result of that, I'm doing something. I'm impactful. I have control. So the strategy there is, if you're experiencing change in your career, go home and bake banana bread or find something that you can control. That's the key here. You do that, you'll start to understand it. The second thing is to understand the need for the change. Now, sometimes there's a lot of mystique over the change. Why are they making these changes? Now, sometimes it's obvious. They're making the changes because it's going to, let's say, if it's an organizational change, they're making the change because their idea is it will either A, help improve shareholder value, or B, help improve the brand, or C, ensure that they're able to grow at an accelerated rate. So usually changes will happen because either they've experienced enough pain that they know they need to do something different, or they think if they make the change, something amazing is going to happen. And generally, they've got their own priorities. A lot of times, changes done at an organizational level don't always consider the people that work for the organizations. So if you're working for an organization that's going through immense change, sometimes you might be on your own. You might have to work on it yourself. And that means understanding that the need to change, even if you don't have all the information at your fingertips and know exactly why they're making the change. You have to get to the point that you understand that there is a need for the change. And you can even hypothesize on what that need is. But the reason the need for the change is necessary is because if there is no point to the change, then that renders it meaningless. And if it's meaningless, then you're never going to be motivated to make it. So even if you don't always understand the need for the change, first of all, try to understand whatever you can predict or whatever you can hypothesize about why the organization's making the change. And if this is in your own life, understand why you need to make the change or why this change needs to happen in your life. Whenever you realize you got to stop doing, like as you get older, you might realize that you can't stay out as late as you used to. I don't remember a specific day where I realized that I needed to go to bed earlier, but it happened. And nowadays I go to bed a lot earlier. I don't go out nearly as much. I don't have nearly as much of a social life as I used to. And it's because things changed in my life and I got older. And what we need to recognize is that sometimes that creeps up. But regardless, we need to understand why it was necessary for us to make those changes. Because when you understand the why, it motivates you. That's why the Simon Sinek stuff of start with why, or what great leaders do to inspire action. So you start with why. When you start with why, it helps to motivate you more. And that's where inspiration comes from. But a lot of times what we talk about is we go, oh, what are the changes I need to make? Not realizing that the why is exactly what we need to focus on if we are to feel inspired and motivated. The third thing we need to do is prepare for resistance. Because whenever you try to change, you'll have two types of resistance. You'll have internal resistance. This is resistance coming from you. And then external resistance, which is resistance coming from the outside. So internal resistance is when you push back against it. In an incredible book, The War of Art, by Stephen Pressfield, he talks about resistance as being the main opponent, let's say, the villain, the challenger, the monster that we face as creators, as artists. And the war of art is really about pushing back against this resistance and overcoming it. And as a result of that, creating. And when you're trying to create as an artist, creating faces this resistance all the time. It's when you procrastinate. It's when you keep finding excuses to do things. It's when you clean everything in your apartment or your home so that you don't have to actually sit at a desk and try to think through ideas. But the thing is, resistance occurs whenever we're making any change, whenever we have to use our brain in any way, for the two reasons, because of the scary part or the amount of energy we need to use when we change. Resistance is tough and it pushes back because ultimately part of us doesn't want to change. But the way in which we need to deal with the internal resistance is we need to negotiate with it. We need to understand not just the why we need to change, but understand what are the techniques we can use to make the change easier to occur. So this means, how can you take the new behaviors you need to engage in, the new things you need to do, how can you make them easier to do? And the old things you used to do, how can you make them harder to do? And when you start to change that, it's transformational. Because what it allows you to do is it allows you to see things differently. And that resistance, while it still will always be there, you now have turned it around and made it less likely to impact you negatively as a result. But then we've got external resistance, and this is when the factors outside of us make things hard. So someone in your life makes it hard for you to make the changes that you know you need to make. Or organizations, the people on your team, for example, they like to do it the way they always did it. And you're trying to push for the new way, and they don't want it to happen. So once again, it's about negotiating, it's about influencing, it's about figuring out how can you change the way in which they feel about the change as well. And once you start to really think this through, this will enable you to be able to transform your relationship with it. And we'll talk more in a later episode on the podcast about driving change, which in many ways is about your ability to motivate people that aren't really super pumped or excited about change to be able to make those changes themselves. But for now, one of the other factors that we need to look at is motivation. And motivation is something that can help us to be able to make changes occur. But the best way to see motivation is really about two things. It's about pain and about pleasure. It's about fear of what we don't want, and it's about desire for what we do want. And in order for us to generate sufficient motivation, we need to paint a picture of a vision of what we want to achieve. How amazing would this be if we were able to adapt to change? So whatever changes you're going through, if you were successfully able to dance with the change, as Alan Watts would say, and you were able to relish in it, you were able to embrace it, and you were able to completely transform as a result of this change and handle it so well, what would that look like? How great would that be? What positive implications would that have in your life? What you do is you vividly imagine that like crazy to the point you feel driven for it. But then you also imagine the worst. You imagine what would happen if change knocked you off? What would imagine if you struggled? What would happen if you kept going over the same route and you kept trying to do things the old way and the change kept occurring? How would it leave you behind? What would you miss out on? What would you lose if you don't make the changes that you need to make to adapt to what's going on outside of you? And that brings us to the next one, which is identity. And this is, to me, one of the most important game changers of all, of everything we've talked about. Because the beliefs that you have about yourself, the story you tell about yourself, could be one of two types of stories. One story is, this is who I am. Carol Dweck would call it, if you're talking about intelligence or ability, she'd call it like the fixed mindset. And what you need to do is have more of what we call the growth mindset. But let me elaborate a bit on this. The growth mindset is believing that you can improve, get better, believing you can develop your skills. Great. But it's not just the growth mindset, because we're not just talking about your ability here. We're not just talking about your intelligence here. When we talk about being able to grow, when we talk about your identity and the way you think about yourself, you need to see yourself as the kind of person that rolls with it, that takes your... I keep getting tempted to sing that song. I love that song. I'm going to play that song as soon as this podcast's finished. I'd play it on the podcast, but I'm afraid of copyright infringements, and then I'd be put in prison, and I might get a huge long sentence, and that would be a big change, and I'd have to handle that. And then I don't know the other fellow prisoners. I had a dream last night, a nightmare actually, that I was in prison. But then I made friends with all the prisoners. I was able to adapt to the change. So identity. We need to be able to make the changes in who we see ourselves as being. And when you can see yourself as the kind of person that is able to roll with it, the kind of person that is able to handle and embrace the change, when you start to think of yourself and tell a story to yourself about yourself as, I'm the kind of person that I'm able to roll with it. I'm the kind of person that's able to handle it. Simply starting that process is the game changer. Simply starting to tell yourself that will actually make you more like that type of person. And that's really what will empower you to be able to handle whatever comes your way, because you start to see yourself as that kind of person, and you start to see yourself as being able to do that. And along the way, this really links into the final piece, which is anti-fragility. And anti-fragility is something that was coined by, again, someone I mentioned earlier, Nassim Nicholas Taleb. But in a nutshell, it's this concept of that you gain from disorder. You gain from chaos. In other words, fragility is when something's easy to break. So you throw something at the wall and it breaks, it was fragile. Anti-fragile is when you throw something at the wall and as a result of being exposed to the adversity of hitting the wall, it becomes stronger. So it's not just resilient, it's not just unbreakable. It's stronger the more it's exposed to adversity. So our muscles are anti-fragile. You lift weights, you break down your muscle fibers, they grow back bigger. They're anti-fragile. And so anti-fragility, when it comes to handling change, is that when change occurs, whatever changes occur, they help you to become better. And so you see yourself as having the identity of someone who rolls with the change, but not just rolls with the change, actually becomes better whenever change occurs. You learn more, you grow more. And really that's what change is all about. In our brains, we experience change through what we call neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity, in a nutshell, is your brain's ability to respond to changes in the environment. It makes new connections. So your brain literally grows in response to change. But when you embrace change, when you relish change, when you look forward to change, when you see change as something that can help you, that mindset, by its very nature, helps to turn it into something that makes you even more anti-fragile. And therefore, whatever changes occur, they make you better, they make you stronger. And so, to finish off, we have to ask ourselves one final question. Why is it that we need to be able to handle change? And we kind of alluded to it from an individual point of view, but how does it make the world a better place? Well, in this world, we've been through COVID. In this world, we're facing rapid change when it comes to AI. In this world, organizations are making huge changes. Organizations are going out of business. Other ones are coming in. In this world, we're facing on the media wars happening all over the world. All of these things that may or may not impact us. Political climates changing, environments changing, people changing their minds, information coming to light that actually what we were told last week wasn't true. Everyone claiming expertise. People going online pretending they're an expert in this and that and the other. Like an expert in psychology doing the Changing podcast. And you've got all of this stuff happening. And when this happens, in order for us to be able to make a positive difference to the world, we have to be able to embrace the constant, incessant change that is happening all around us and happening to us. And when we start to become masters of the changes that we experience, we develop this change confidence. And when you have this change confidence, it means you can roll with it. You can do whatever it is that you need to do in order for you to be able to thrive, because you've got the right mindset, you've got the right attitude, and whenever changes occur, they make you stronger, they make you better, and they make you more able to deal with whatever comes your way. So that's how you handle change. Hope you found this useful. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you have a wonderful day. Continue to believe better. And as always, may you handle change wonderfully. And may the force continue to be with you. I'm Owen Fitzpatrick. Thank you very much for watching. Oh, and check out some of the other videos, the other episodes. I'm telling you, I've such a great episode that I'm pointing to right now. You need to watch it. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure